My father's face was ashen. My mother clutched her pearls like they were the only thing keeping her from drowning. And my sister looked like she'd just seen a ghost. And in a way, she had. The ghost of the family they destroyed to build their perfect little life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Alex, 28 years old, financial auditor by profession, unwanted daughter by circumstance. This is the story of how one dinner bill unraveled 30 years of lies. Richard and Catherine Harper, my parents. At least, that's what it said on the adoption papers. To the outside world, they were philanthropy's golden couple, the kind of people who smiled for charity galas and wrote checks that made problems disappear. Then there was Olivia, 31, their biological daughter, their real daughter. The one whose baby photos actually lined the hallway, whose achievements were framed and mounted like trophies. Me? I was the asterisk, the footnote in the family story. And this is Alex. She's adopted. Growing up in the Harper household was like living in a museum where I was the only exhibit not meant to be touched. Every family dinner, every holiday photo, every milestone, I was included, but never belonged. Olivia learned early that I was different. She didn't need to be cruel outright. She was far more sophisticated than that. It was the way she'd introduce me to her friends. This is Alex, my parents' charity project. The way she'd leave me out of sister outings, then post about how family meant everything to her. Death by 1,000 cuts. That's what they call it. Each one too small to make a scene about. But together? They bled me dry. I told myself it didn't matter. I built a life, got my degree, made my own money, kept my distance but showed up when expected. The dutiful adopted daughter playing her part. I thought I had made peace with being the eternal outsider. I was wrong. Because 3 weeks ago, I received an invitation to a dinner at the Gilded Oak. The kind of restaurant where they don't list prices because if you have to ask, you don't belong there. A family celebration, the invitation said. I should have known better. I should have seen it coming. But I actually believed, God help me, that maybe this time would be different. That maybe after 28 years I had finally earned my place at their table. I thought this dinner was a celebration of their lives. I had no idea it was going to be the funeral for mine. And the birth of the woman I was about to become. The Gilded Oak doesn't just serve dinner, it stages theater. Vaulted ceilings, crystal chandeliers catching light like frozen fireworks. Tables spaced far enough apart that your family's dirty laundry stays private. Usually. I arrived exactly on time. The Harpers were already seated. Of course they were. Richard in his tailored suit, Catherine with her signature chignon, and Olivia. Olivia was radiant, hair styled within an inch of its life, a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and on her left hand, catching the light with every calculated gesture, a diamond the size of a small country. She was getting married. Alex, you're here. Catherine's voice had that particular pitch that meant she was performing for the nearby tables. Come, sit, darling. Darling. She only called me that in public. I took my seat. The chair felt like a witness stand. Isn't it gorgeous? Olivia thrust her hand across the table, the diamond practically blinding me. Carter proposed last weekend, Paris, the Eiffel Tower at sunset. It was like something out of a movie. Carter, her fiancé, hedge fund manager, old money, the kind of man whose family tree didn't have any questionable branches. He sat beside her, all charming smiles and firm handshakes. Alex, Wonderful to finally meet you. Olivia's told me so much about her family. Her family, not our family. But I smiled, congratulated them, played my part. The dinner continued. Champagne flowed. Toasts were made. Richard talked about legacy and family bonds, his hand resting on Catherine's like they were posing for a portrait. I was watching a performance, and I wasn't part of the cast. I was the audience they'd forgotten to charge admission. Then Carter turned to me. So, Alex, Olivia mentioned you were adopted. Do you know anything about your heritage? Your birth family? The table went quiet. My blood ran cold. I could feel every eye on me. It was the question I'd been dreading my entire life, and someone had just asked it at a table where the answer was a loaded gun. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Olivia leaned forward, her smile sharp as broken glass. Oh, Carter, we don't really talk about that. Alex is, well, she's our little rescue project. A stray we picked up. She laughed. Actually laughed. Honestly, we don't know much about where she came from. Does it really matter? Catherine touched her napkin to her lips. Olivia, be nice. Be nice. Not, that's inappropriate. Not, don't say that. Just, be nice. Richard said nothing. He stared at his wine glass like it held the answers to questions he refused to ask. Olivia wasn't finished. She turned to me, her eyes glittering with something I couldn't name. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. Actually, Alex, I've been meaning to talk to you about something. Her voice dropped to a stage whisper, loud enough for Carter to hear, quiet enough to seem intimate. This dinner, it's really a celebration for the Blood family, the real Harpers. Carter and I are joining two legacies, you know? It's about lineage, history, things that actually matter. She tilted her head, her smile never wavering. It might be better if you just went and found another table. This is kind of a family moment. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Carter looked uncomfortable. Catherine gasped softly but didn't speak. Richard studied his wine, and I stood up. I didn't make a scene, didn't cry, didn't scream. I simply gathered my purse, pushed in my chair, and walked away. Because that's what good adopted daughters do. They disappear when asked. Behind me, I heard Olivia's bright laughter resume. The conversation flowed on like I'd never been there at all. I made it to the bar before my hands started shaking. The bartender was kind. He didn't ask questions when I ordered whiskey at a restaurant where most people drank wine that cost more than my car payment. I sat there for an hour, maybe two, watching. Watching them through the archway, watching them laugh, watching them toast. Watching Olivia show off her ring to passing waiters who had no choice but to admire it. They never once looked for me. Not once. At 10:47 p.m., they stood up. Richard helped Catherine with her coat. Carter held Olivia's hand. They walked past the bar, close enough that I could smell Catherine's perfume, and headed for the exit. Olivia glanced my way. Just for a second. Our eyes met. She smiled. Then they were gone. 5 minutes later, the maitre d' approached me. His expression was carefully neutral, the face of a man who'd seen every kind of family drama this city had to offer. Ms. Harper, there's a matter of the bill. My stomach dropped. I'm sorry, what? The party you were dining with. They've left. And the bill? He slid a leather portfolio across the bar. It's been left under your name. I opened it. $3,270. Champagne. Oysters. 2 bottles of wine that probably had their own security detail. Olivia's special order lamb that she'd barely touched. The engagement cake they'd had specially made. All of it, every single charge, under my name, and tucked inside the portfolio, in Olivia's perfect handwriting on the back of her business card. Thanks for celebrating with the real family. Consider this your contribution to my new life. You're welcome for all the years we spent raising you. Oh, I stared at those words until they blurred. The bartender cleared his throat. Will you be paying tonight, or? I pulled out my card. My hand didn't shake. It should have, but it didn't. Because in that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It hardened. It turned to steel. They thought they were punishing a stray, teaching me my place, reminding me that I would never belong. But they forgot one thing about me. I'm a financial auditor, and I paid that bill knowing it wasn't an expense. It was an investment in the truth. I didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the one after that. I sat in my apartment with my laptop, 3 monitors, and enough coffee to fuel a small army. The fury that had been simmering for 28 years, it was boiling now, and I was going to put it to good use. They wanted to remind me that I wasn't family. Fine. Family gets loyalty. Family gets the benefit of the doubt. Family gets privacy. But strangers? Strangers get audited. I started with Richard's company, Harper and Associates. On paper, it was impressive. Commercial real estate development, multiple properties across 3 states, annual revenue in the 8 figures. But I wasn't looking at the paper. I was looking underneath it. Shell corporations. So many shell corporations. Each one nested inside another like Russian dolls. Each one moving money in ways that made my professional instincts scream. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Loans from banks that didn't exist 6 months ago. Assets that were listed at triple their actual value. I traced every transaction, every wire transfer, every suspiciously timed deposit, and slowly, like watching a photo develop in a dark room, the truth came into focus. Harper and Associates wasn't a successful company. It was a ghost. Richard had been shuffling money between accounts for years, creating the illusion of growth while the foundation rotted underneath. The real estate portfolio? Mortgaged to the hilt. The investments? Leveraged beyond reason. The cash flow? A fiction maintained by loans he couldn't possibly repay. They weren't rich. They were millions in debt. The champagne we drank that night? The diamond on Olivia's finger? The dinner they stuck me with? All of it was smoke and mirrors, a desperate performance by people clinging to a lifestyle they could no longer afford. And Olivia's engagement. I pulled up Carter's profile, Hamilton Carter III. Family wealth going back 4 generations. A trust fund that could buy a small island. The engagement wasn't a love match, it was a merger. A bailout package wrapped in white lace. They stuck me with that bill because they were flat broke. The real family celebration was actually a last-ditch effort to maintain the illusion long enough to seal the deal with Carter's money. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. This should have been enough. This discovery should have satisfied something inside me. I had the truth. I had the ammunition. But it wasn't enough. Because the money explained the bill, but it didn't explain the coldness. It didn't explain a lifetime of being kept at arm's length. It didn't explain why Olivia was taught to treat me like a dirty secret from the moment I arrived. There was something else, something deeper. So I kept digging. The thing about adoption records is that they're sealed for a reason. Privacy, protection, a clean break between the past and the future. But every lock has a key. And I was very, very motivated. It took 3 days, 2 lawyers, and one sympathetic clerk who believed my story about wanting to know my medical history. The file was thin, most of them are, but it was enough. Name of biological mother, Eleanor Lawson. Name of biological father, Benjamin Lawson. Date of surrender, March 15th, 1997. I was 6 months old. Reason listed, parents deceased, no living relatives able to care for child. Deceased. I stared at that word. My birth parents were dead. I'd always known I was adopted, but I'd never known why. And now? Now I had names. Eleanor and Benjamin Lawson. The names meant nothing to me, but something about them felt familiar, like a song I'd heard once years ago that I couldn't quite place. I ran their names through every database I had access to: property records, business filings, court documents, obituaries. And then I found it. A business partnership agreement from 1994. Harper and Associates. Original founding documents. 3 names were listed as partners: Richard Harper, Catherine Harper, Benjamin Lawson. My father, my adoptive father, had been in business with my biological father. My hands were shaking now, actually shaking. I pulled up more documents: articles of incorporation, tax filings, partnership dissolution notices. The timeline pieced itself together like a puzzle I didn't want to solve. 1994. Harper and Associates, founded by 3 partners. Richard handled operations. Catherine managed finances. Benjamin was the visionary, the one with the ideas, the connections, the golden touch. 1995. The company's first major deal, a commercial property development that would make them all wealthy. 1996. Benjamin Lawson accused of embezzlement, company funds missing, criminal charges filed. December 1996. I was born. February 1997. Benjamin and Eleanor Lawson died in a car accident. Single-car collision on a rural highway. No other vehicles involved. March 1997. Charges dropped posthumously. Insufficient evidence to proceed. March 1997. I was surrendered to the state. May 1997. Richard and Catherine Harper filed for adoption. Emergency placement approved. I sat back, my heart pounding. This wasn't random. This wasn't charity. Richard and Catherine didn't adopt me out of the goodness of their hearts. They adopted me because I kept digging deeper into old newspaper archives, court records that had been digitized but never properly indexed, business records that most people wouldn't know how to find. And then I found the final piece, a sealed court document, an investigation that was opened and then quietly closed after Benjamin's death. But the investigators' notes were still there, buried in an appendix that no one thought to redact. Discrepancies in financial records suggest funds were not embezzled by B. Lawson, but rather moved by C. Harper to offshore accounts. Further investigation warranted. However, with Lawson's death and insufficient evidence to prosecute Harper, case closed. Catherine, not Benjamin. Catherine had stolen the money. She had framed my biological father. She had destroyed him. And then he and my mother died in a single-car collision 2 months later. I had a choice in that moment. I could stop there. I could walk away. I could accept what I'd found and move on. But I didn't. Because I needed to know everything. I pulled up the accident report. Read it 3 times. Something felt wrong. The details were too convenient. The investigation too brief. I reached out to a private investigator I'd worked with on fraud cases. Paid him double his usual rate to look into it quietly. He called me back 2 days later. "Alex, I don't know what you're into, but this thing stinks. The accident investigation was handled by a single officer who retired 2 weeks later and moved to Florida. The car was totaled, but the brake lines. Someone should have looked harder at those brake lines. My world tilted. What are you saying? I'm saying it wasn't an accident. I can't prove it. Not after almost 30 years. But it wasn't an accident. I hung up. I sat in the dark for hours, and then I started organizing everything I'd found into a single folder. Because I had one more question that needed answering. Why did they keep me? It took me another week to find the answer. Another week of digging through archives, cross-referencing dates, building a timeline that made my blood run cold. Benjamin and Eleanor Lawson weren't just Richard's business partners. They were the heart of Harper and Associates. Benjamin had the vision, the connections, the reputation in commercial real estate that opened every door. Eleanor was a brilliant architect. Her designs were the reason their first 3 projects became landmarks. Richard? Richard was the operations guy, the background player, competent but unremarkable. And Catherine? Catherine was supposed to handle the money. Instead, she stole it. The scheme was elegant, I'll give her that. Small amounts at first. Routing through shell companies that Benjamin didn't know existed. By the time the major deal went through in 1995, the one that should have made them all wealthy, Catherine had siphoned off nearly $2 million. When Benjamin finally noticed the discrepancies, Catherine didn't panic. She reframed the narrative. Suddenly, Benjamin was the one under investigation, his signature on documents he'd never seen, his name on accounts he'd never opened. Catherine had spent a year building the perfect frame, and when she sprung the trap, it was airtight. Almost. Because Benjamin was smart. He hired a forensic accountant, started his own investigation, and in January 1997, 1 month before the accident, he found proof. Proof that Catherine had orchestrated everything. He scheduled a meeting with the district attorney for February 18th, 1997. He never made it. February 14th, 1997. Valentine's Day. Benjamin and Eleanor Lawson died when their car went off Highway 47 during a snowstorm. Brake failure, the report said. Tragic accident. The meeting with the DA was canceled. The investigation quietly closed. The charges against Benjamin remained on the books, but were dropped posthumously. Not because he was innocent, but because dead men can't stand trial. Richard and Catherine took full control of the company. Within 6 months, they'd restructured everything under their names. The Lawson legacy was erased like it had never existed. Except for one problem. Me. I was 6 months old. No living relatives. The state took custody while they sorted out what to do with me. And then Richard and Catherine Harper, the people who had destroyed my parents, filed for emergency adoption. I found the paperwork. Read their statement to the judge. Benjamin and Eleanor were dear friends. We feel a moral obligation to care for their daughter. It's what they would have wanted. The adoption was fast-tracked. Approved in 3 weeks. I stared at my own adoption certificate, and suddenly, everything made sense. I wasn't adopted out of love. I wasn't adopted out of guilt. I was adopted because I was evidence. As long as Richard and Catherine raised me, the daughter of the people they destroyed, they looked like grieving friends honoring a tragic loss. They looked like heroes. No one would suspect that those same heroes had murdered my parents and stolen everything they'd built. I was their alibi, their shield, their proof that they had nothing to hide. And Olivia knew. Maybe not the details. Maybe not the murder. But she knew enough. Knew that I was dangerous. knew that I represented something her parents needed to keep contained. That's why she was taught to keep me at arm's length, why she was allowed, encouraged even, to treat me as less than, why every cruel word, every dismissal, every reminder that I didn't belong was met with silence from Richard and Catherine. Because if I ever felt like I truly belonged, I might start asking questions. I might start digging. And now I had. My entire life was a lie. 28 years of being tolerated, not loved. 28 years of being a trophy on a shelf, proof of their benevolence while my real parents rotted in the ground. The grief for Eleanor and Benjamin, the parents I never knew, was a dull, distant ache. How do you mourn people who are just names on paper? But the anger was a living thing. It had teeth and claws, and it wanted blood. I printed everything, every document, every transaction record, every piece of evidence I'd compiled over 3 weeks of sleepless nights. I organized it into a single manila folder, thick, heavy, undeniable. And then I picked up my phone and made a call. Mom, it's Alex. I think we need to talk. Family meeting, your house, tomorrow night. I want to apologize for how I acted at the dinner. I think I owe everyone an explanation. Catherine's relief was audible. Oh, darling, of course. We'd love that. We've been so worried about you. Darling. That word again. Great. I'll see you tomorrow at 7. I hung up. Tomorrow night, the Harpers would learn that their trophy daughter had become something else entirely. A reckoning. I didn't sleep that night either. But this time it wasn't because of rage or grief. It was because of clarity. For the first time in my life, everything made sense. Every cold look, every dismissal, every time Catherine had called me darling in public and ignored me at home, every time Richard had looked through me like I was a ghost. They weren't looking at me. They were looking at Benjamin and Eleanor, at the ghosts they'd created. I was a living reminder of their greatest sin, paraded around as proof of their virtue. And Olivia? Olivia had learned from the best. She'd been trained since childhood to see me as an outsider. Not because I was adopted, but because I was a Lawson, the family they'd destroyed to build their empire. I spent the day organizing my evidence, not chronologically. That would be too easy to dismiss, too easy to talk their way around. No, I organized it like a prosecutor building a case. Financial crimes first, the embezzlement, the shell companies, the offshore accounts. Documents showing Catherine's signature on transactions that had been blamed on Benjamin. Then the timeline of the investigation. Benjamin's appointment with the DA. The accident. The convenient closure of all inquiries. Then the adoption. How quickly it was processed. How Richard and Catherine had inserted themselves into my life within weeks of my parents' deaths. And finally, the current situation. Richard's failing company, the desperate debt. Olivia's strategic engagement to Carter. The dinner bill that had started this entire unraveling. I placed a photo on top of the stack. The only photo I'd been able to find of Benjamin and Eleanor Lawson. A newspaper clipping from 1994, announcing their involvement in a charity project. They were young, smiling. Eleanor had her hand on her stomach. She must have been pregnant with me. They looked happy. They looked like they had a future. I closed the folder. At 6:45 p.m., I got in my car and drove to the Harper house, the house I'd grown up in, the house that had never felt like home. Now I knew why. It was built on the graves of my real parents. I parked in the driveway. The lights were on inside. Through the window, I could see them gathered in the living room. Richard in his armchair, Catherine on the sofa, Olivia perched on the arm, probably practicing her apology acceptance speech. They thought I was coming to grovel, to apologize, to accept my place as the grateful adopted daughter who'd overreacted about a dinner bill. I picked up the folder from the passenger seat. It was heavy, satisfyingly so. I walked to the front door. Didn't knock, I still had a key. Walked right in like I belonged there. Because, for the first time in my life, I did. This house was built with Lawson money, furnished with Lawson success, maintained with Lawson innovation. Every brick was mine. The living room fell silent when I walked in. Richard lowered his newspaper. Catherine's book closed with a soft thump. Olivia's phone disappeared into her pocket, but not before I saw she'd been texting Carter. Alex! Catherine stood up, arms outstretched like she was about to hug me. We're so glad you called. We've been so worried. Sit down. My voice was quiet, calm, but something in my tone made her freeze. Excuse me? Sit. Down. She sat. Olivia rolled her eyes. Oh, here we go. The drama queen returns. Are you really still upset about the dinner? Because honestly, Alex, it was just a joke. It wasn't a joke. I walked to the center of the room. Stood there with the manila folder held against my chest like a shield, or a weapon. Richard folded his newspaper, his expression carefully neutral. Alex, your mother's right. We have been concerned. The way you left that night, it wasn't like you. We understand if you were upset, but family works through these things. We're willing to forget it happened if you... I'm not here to apologize. The words landed like stones in still water. Olivia laughed. Actually laughed. Then why are you here? To lecture us about family values? That's rich coming from... I'm here to return something that belongs to you. I walked to the coffee table, placed the folder down. It landed with a heavy thud that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. What is that? Catherine's voice was tight. The truth. I didn't open it. Not yet. I just stood there, my hand resting on top of the folder, watching their faces. Olivia's smirk was already fading. She'd seen enough legal documents in her corporate law career to recognize the weight of what sat on that table. Richard's expression hadn't changed, but his knuckles were white where they gripped the arms of his chair. And Catherine? Catherine had gone very, very still. You wanted me to find another table, Olivia. I looked at my sister. No, not my sister, never my sister, and smiled. So I did. I found a table 30 years in the past, and do you know what I discovered there? Alex. I don't know what you think you found, but... Richard started to stand. Sit. Down. He sat. I opened the folder, pulled out the first document, the 1994 partnership agreement with 3 names. I held it up so they could all see it. Harper and Associates, founded by Richard Harper, Catherine Harper, and Benjamin Lawson. I paused. Let that name hang in the air. That's a familiar name, isn't it? Because Benjamin Lawson was my father, my biological father, your business partner. Catherine's hand went to her throat. Richard's face had lost all color, but Olivia looked confused. What are you talking about? Your parents died in an accident. Everyone knows that... Oh, they died. But it wasn't an accident. I placed the accident report on the table, then the investigation files, then the financial records showing Catherine's embezzlement, then the timeline of Benjamin's planned meeting with the DA. Document after document, piece after piece, building a case that couldn't be denied. You framed him, I said, looking directly at Catherine. You stole $2 million from the company, and when Benjamin figured it out, you made it look like he was the thief. And when he found proof, when he was about to expose you, he and my mother died in a very convenient car accident. That's insane. Catherine's voice was shaking. Alex, you can't possibly believe. I believe the evidence. I believe the timeline. I believe the investigators' notes that were buried in a file everyone thought was sealed. I pulled out that document, the one that spelled it out in black and white. Catherine Harper is the primary suspect. However, with Benjamin Lawson's death, there is insufficient evidence to proceed with prosecution. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. And then, I continued, my voice barely above a whisper, 2 weeks after you murdered my parents, you adopted me. Emergency placement, fast-tracked through the system, the grieving friends honoring their fallen partner by raising his orphaned daughter. I turned to Richard. You knew. You've always known. You let her do it. Maybe you helped. And then, you spent 28 years looking at me like I was a ghost because that's exactly what I am to you. I'm the ghost of the man you destroyed, the living, breathing evidence of your crime that you had to keep close, had to control. This is ridiculous, Olivia said, but her voice lacked conviction. She was looking at her parents, and something in their expressions was confirming everything I'd said. Is it? I pulled out the final documents. Because here's the beautiful part. You thought you were so clever. You thought adopting me made you look innocent. But what you actually did was give me a legal right to everything Benjamin Lawson built. Because this company, it wasn't Richard's vision. It wasn't Catherine's business acumen. It was Benjamin's connections, Eleanor's designs, their reputation. You just stole it and slapped your name on it. I placed my hand on the folder. You treated me like a stray, like a charity case, like something you could dismiss and discard whenever it suited you. You stuck me with a $3,000 bill to remind me I'd never belong. I looked at each of them in turn. Richard, who still hadn't spoken, Catherine, whose perfect composure was cracking, Olivia, whose engagement ring suddenly looked like a noose. But you forgot something important. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to barely a whisper. I'm not your charity case. I'm not your adopted daughter. I'm not the stray you picked up out of the goodness of your hearts. I smiled. I'm a Lawson. And this house, this company, this entire life you've built, it belongs to me. It always has. The silence stretched like a wire pulled too tight. And then Richard spoke, his voice hoarse. What do you want? I straightened up, smoothed my jacket. Now, I said softly, we're going to talk about what you did to the Lawsons. What happened next wasn't dramatic. Not in the way you'd expect. There was no screaming, no tears, no desperate denials. Richard sat in his chair like a man who'd been waiting 30 years for this moment to arrive. Catherine's hands shook as she reached for her wine glass. It was empty. She stared at it like she couldn't remember how that had happened. And Olivia finally understood. Oh my God. She looked at her parents, her face pale. It's true, all of it. You actually did this. Olivia, sweetheart. Catherine started. Don't. Olivia stood up, backing away from the sofa like it was contaminated. Don't you dare. All my life you told me she was different, that she didn't really belong, that we had to be careful around her. I thought it was because she was adopted. But it wasn't that at all, was it? She looked at me, And for the first time in our lives, I saw something other than contempt in her eyes. Fear. You kept her close because she was evidence. You raised her like a pet because it made you look innocent. And you taught me to treat her like garbage so she'd never feel comfortable enough to start asking questions. That's not... Catherine tried again. My entire childhood was a lie. Olivia's voice cracked. Every family dinner, every holiday photo, every time you made me exclude her from something, it was all to cover up murder? Murder. We don't know that it was murder, Richard said quietly, finally speaking. The investigation was inconclusive. It could have been an accident. I laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was bitter even to my own ears. An accident that happened 2 weeks before your business partner was scheduled to expose your wife's embezzlement? That killed both parents but left their 6-month-old daughter miraculously unharmed in the back seat? That was investigated by a single officer who retired immediately afterward and moved to another state? I pulled out another document, placed it on top of the pile. I had a private investigator look into that officer. He bought a house in Florida for cash 2 months after the accident, a house that cost $300,000, on a cop's salary. Richard's jaw tightened. So no, I continued. We're not going to pretend it was an accident. We're going to call it what it was. You murdered my parents. You stole their company. You stole their daughter. And you've spent 30 years profiting from their deaths, while treating me like a burden you were gracious enough to carry. Silence. Then Olivia grabbed her purse. I'm leaving. I can't be here right now. Sit down, Olivia. She froze. Excuse me? Sit down. Because you're part of this too. I didn't know. I was a child when... I'm not talking about the murders. I'm talking about the dinner. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, showed her the transaction. $3,270. That's what you stuck me with. That's the bill you left in my name with a cute little note about celebrating the real family. Olivia's face flushed. That was just... I was upset. You were being difficult? I was being difficult? I showed up to celebrate your engagement. I congratulated you. I played my part. And you told me to find another table because this was for the blood family only. I stepped closer to her. She actually flinched. You humiliated me in public. You abandoned me with a bill you knew I'd have to pay. And you did it because that's what you've been taught to do your entire life. Treat Alex like trash. Remind Alex she doesn't belong. Keep Alex in her place. That's not fair. Fair? I smiled. You want to talk about fair? Let me tell you what's fair. I turned back to Richard and Catherine. Here's what's going to happen. You have 2 choices. Richard's expression was stone. And those are? Choice 1. Tomorrow morning, you call Carter. You tell him everything. The embezzlement, the fraud, the murders, the adoption, all of it. You come clean about exactly who the Harpers really are. Olivia made a strangled sound. No, you can't. I'm not finished. After you confess to Carter, you wire me $3,270, the dinner bill I paid, plus $2 million, the amount Catherine stole from my father. That money goes into a fund I'm establishing, the Lawson Legacy Fund. It'll support causes my real parents cared about. Architecture scholarships, real estate development programs for underserved communities. The things Benjamin and Eleanor would have done with their success if they'd lived to see it. $2 million. Catherine's voice was faint. We don't have... Oh, I know you don't have it. Not anymore. You've leveraged everything, mortgaged the properties, maxed out the credit lines trying to maintain the illusion, which brings me to your second choice. I picked up the folder, held it against my chest. I take this to the district attorney. I take it to the IRS. I take it to every journalist who's ever written about the Harper family's charitable work. I expose everything: the embezzlement, the fraud, the suspicious accident, the adoption that was really a cover-up. All of it. And I let the world decide what they think of Richard and Catherine Harper. The clock ticked. But here's the thing about choice two, I continued softly. If I go public, it doesn't just destroy you, it destroys Olivia too, because Carter's family won't just call off the engagement. They'll make sure everyone in their social circle knows exactly what kind of family she comes from, her career, her reputation, her perfect life. All of it gone. Olivia sank back onto the sofa, her face in her hands. So you choose, I said. You can confess, pay what you owe, and live the rest of your lives knowing that at least you did one honest thing. Or you can let me burn it all down, and we'll see what's left when the smoke clears. Richard looked at Catherine. Catherine looked at the floor. How long do we have? Richard asked. 72 hours. If I don't receive confirmation that you've spoken to Carter and a wire transfer receipt for the full amount, I make some calls. And Richard? I smiled. I'm a financial auditor. I know exactly which agencies to call first. I walked to the door, stopped, turned back. Oh, and one more thing. That night at the Gilded Oak, when Olivia told me to find another table, when you all sat there and let it happen, I looked at each of them in turn. That was the best thing you ever did for me. Because if you hadn't pushed me away, I might never have started digging. I might have spent the rest of my life being your convenient little trophy, your proof of innocence, your perfectly grateful adopted daughter. I opened the door. But you couldn't even let me have that, could you? You couldn't stand the idea of me at your celebration. So you threw me away. And in doing so, you gave me something far more valuable than a seat at your table. I smiled. You gave me a reason to find out who I really am. And it turns out, I'm not a Harper at all. The night air was cold as I walked to my car. Behind me, the lights in the Harper house burned bright. For now. 48 hours later, my phone rang. It was a wire transfer confirmation. $2,003,270 deposited into the newly established Lawson Legacy Fund. 10 minutes after that, I received an email from Carter's law firm. A very polite, very formal notice that the engagement between Carter Hamilton III and Olivia Harper had been mutually dissolved due to irreconcilable circumstances. Olivia didn't call. Neither did Richard or Catherine, but I didn't expect them to. The silence was its own kind of answer. I could have taken everything public anyway. Part of me wanted to. Part of me wanted to watch their world burn just to see the flames. But I didn't. Not because they deserved mercy. They didn't. But because Benjamin and Eleanor Lawson deserved better than to have their deaths turned into a media circus. They deserved to be remembered for what they built, not for how they died. The Lawson Legacy Fund launched 3 weeks later. The first scholarship went to a young architect from a low-income neighborhood. The second funded a community development project in the city where my parents had grown up. I attended the ceremony, stood in the back of the room while a student accepted an award in Benjamin and Eleanor's name. No one knew who I was. No one knew the story behind the fund. And that was exactly how I wanted it. As for the Harpers, Richard's company filed for bankruptcy 6 months later. The house went into foreclosure. Catherine moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. Olivia left the state. Last I heard, she's working for a firm in Seattle. We haven't spoken. I don't hate them anymore. Hate requires energy, and I have better things to do with mine. I'm building something now, something that honors the people who should have raised me, the people whose names I carry, even if I never got to know their faces. Sometimes I think about that dinner at the Gilded Oak, about Olivia's smile when she told me to find another table, about walking away, humiliated and alone. At the time, it felt like the worst night of my life. Now I know it was the beginning of a different one. A life where I'm not the adopted daughter grateful for scraps. A life where I'm not the Harper family asterisk. I'm Alex Lawson, and I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.